I'm originally from California, and a couple of years ago, I was laid off from my job and decided my best option would be to use my savings to buy a house in a mid-sized town in the Midwest. I found a new job that paid enough to cover a mortgage, and I decided to go for it. Before moving, I wanted to travel a bit, so one night, while overseas, I found myself searching Zillow. I still had about a month left on my lease in California, but I found the perfect house. It was one town over from where my sister, her husband, and my young nephew lived. And just as importantly, it was within my budget. Being impatient, I asked my sister to go over and look at the house for me. She did. She even FaceTimed me while she was there and showed me all around. I absolutely loved it. I made an offer that honestly was significantly under asking price, just to see if they would counter and I could perhaps get a better deal. I was shocked when my offer was almost immediately accepted. Unbelievable joy was what I was experiencing in my hotel room that night. I was so excited to move, so pumped to start a new adventure. I finished out my lease in California and moved across country, headed to my new home. The first night I was there, I had very little with me. I had ordered a few pieces of furniture that my sister had assisted with being delivered. So I had a couch, a couple of side tables, but other than that, nothing had been built. I slept on a mattress on the floor since I hadn't assembled my bed frame yet, and after a long day of everything that goes into a big move, I was completely exhausted. I found myself on the brink of sleep when I heard what I can only characterize as a banging noise coming from upstairs. I found that incredibly strange because it's a one-story house. Snapping out of my near dream state, I quickly remembered that houses in the Midwest have attics and sometimes basements. I wasn't used to this coming from a small apartment in California. I thought about going to check out the noise, but thinking that it may have been a small animal that I wasn't ready to deal with, I decided to just let it be for the night and look into it in the morning. But shortly thereafter, I heard another bang, this time much louder than before. The thought that it could have been an animal was now draining from my body. After a few moments of silently listening, the banging changed into a scuttling sound. It actually almost sounded like a set of muffled footsteps. Fear had absolutely taken hold of me at this point. I grabbed my phone and flipped on the flashlight. I went to the part of the hallway where there was access to the attic and saw that my attic door, the thing I'd have to pull down to get the ladder to drop, wasn't completely closed. I knew then that I wasn't going to explore any more of my new house by myself. So I went straight back to my room, locked the door, and kept the lights on. Now, part of me knew that I should have just left then, but another part of me thought that I was being ridiculous. Whatever was up there, it wasn't what my mind was telling me it was. There had to be some logical explanation aside from there being some hidden person in my attic. After all, my sister had looked at the house, and when I was on video with her, she had gone into the attic. We both saw that it was absolutely empty. And since then, the house had been closed and locked up tight. I told myself that I was safe if I just stayed in my room with the light on and stayed awake. I did, for a while at least, and didn't hear any further noises. I guess I fell asleep at some point because I woke up with a start a few hours later, just as dawn was beginning to crack outside. However, what had woken me up was a noise. Something loud, something heavy, and it came from my living room. Instinctively, which it had to have been because I was still half asleep, I ran to the main room of the house and saw that one of my end tables was now halfway across the room, in addition to my front door being wide open. I stepped just to the edge of the door and peered out, seeing a dark figure, now probably about half a block away, running in the opposite direction of my home. Whoever that was, they were in my house only a moment before, and from the looks of it, they had kicked my table on their way out. That was the sound that I heard. I yanked the door shut, grabbed my phone once more, this time calling the police. When they arrived, an officer went up into the attic and found food wrappers, an ice chest, a pile of dirty blankets, and a bucket filled with human waste. Someone had been living there for what looked like quite a while. That officer and his partner informed me that this wasn't the first time that they had been to my house. The previous owners had a daughter who was not well and had gotten in trouble with the law quite often. The family had moved because the neighbors kept calling the police on them for screaming, fighting, and other odd things happening in the house involving the daughter. The cops said that they believed she was either bipolar or was schizophrenic and had been known to be violent. This next bit, it took them a while to actually say, which put me even more on edge. They told me that they thought it might have been the daughter in the attic. This wasn't exactly something they could prove on the spot. They didn't find any identifying evidence in the house. No journals, no old photos, nothing like that. But what they were saying made a bit of sense. They alluded to the fact that she may not have wanted to move when her parents decided to sell the house. And being someone that grew up in the home, maybe she knew a way to get in without breaking a window. Or perhaps she even still had a key from before the locks were changed. To this day, if it was her, I don't know how she got in, how long she was there before me, and how this whole thing would have played out had she not decided to just leave. I remember thinking back and finding it curious that the sellers accepted an offer way under asking price. But it makes much more sense if they were motivated to sell, and getting out as quickly as possible was their main motive. It just seems like they were the ones ready to leave, likely much more than their daughter. I still live in the house today, but there are times where I get creeped out at night. Sometimes I'll hear sounds, usually something benign, wind whipping my plants against the window, or the foundation of my house creaking. I'll quickly calm myself and catch my bearings, but for a moment, a short, fleeting blip, I'll remember that someone had been living in my attic when I moved in, and I'll find myself wondering, are they back? I came on here to share a story that my dad recently told me, one that he hasn't told anybody about up until now. Quick backstory here. My dad is a retired park ranger, if that's what you even call it. He worked for the National Park Service up until about 3 years ago. His usual tasks involved taking people on tours along the Appalachian Trail, maintaining the forestry and the wildlife habitats of the animals that live there. This story goes back to the summer of 2003, when my dad and a colleague, we'll call him John, were sent out to try and locate an adult elk, a particular male named Billy, who was usually very tame and was often found close to houses. But Billy hadn't been seen for over a week, and apparently this was very unusual for him. So my dad was dropped off along the trail, whilst John took the truck and drove further down in order to try and locate Billy. They had been searching all day for him, and this was the last stop of the trek, as there were only a few hours of daylight left. So, as the story goes, my dad had been walking along the trail for a little over an hour when he heard a disturbance in the distance off to his left. He could hear the snapping of tree branches, and he decided to follow where the noises were coming from, all in the hopes that it could be Billy the elk. As he got closer, he said he began to smell a foul odor and instinctively knew that it was some sort of dead animal. He was right. As he emerged through the bush, laying on the ground in a small opening of trees was a carcass of a large elk. He could see by the tag on one of the ears that it was Billy. However, he was nearly immediately shocked by the condition that the animal was in. Billy had been severely mutilated. His eyes and tongue were now gone, his throat torn out, and his stomach had been ripped open so that the intestines were now protruding onto the forest floor. He also noticed that little chunks of flesh had been bitten from the torso. In addition, the entire right front leg was missing. My dad reasoned that the animal had been attacked by either a black bear or a large pack of coyotes, as nothing else would tackle a fully grown adult elk. However, even this seemed strange because elk were usually too big for even apex predators to try to take down. What disturbed him even further was the way in which the animal had been mutilated after death. This is something that my dad even made a point of saying that he had never witnessed anything like this before. That in nature, it would be very unusual for predators to mutilate a corpse in such a way. Feeling unnerved by this discovery, my dad radioed John and told him that he had located Billy. Before giving him his approximate location, John had told him that he had wandered off the beaten track and that it would likely take him around an hour to get back to where the truck was parked and drive back to my dad's location. So to that, my dad was told to wait where he was until John got back to him. It was nearly dark at this point, and my dad remembered beginning to feel very unsettled. He had a flashlight with him and bear spray, but noted that he still felt vulnerable while out there alone in the forest. After around 15 minutes or so, he heard the same noises that he had heard earlier, much closer now as he was off the trail. He would hear footsteps and the occasional growl of something hidden within the thick bushes straight ahead of him. He said that every so often he could hear slow, heavy breathing and the snapping of branches as whatever it was paced around the forest. He began to get the feeling that he was being watched and worried that the coyotes, or perhaps even a bear, was now stalking him. He said that every so often he would wave his flashlight in the direction of the disturbance and yell out, doing what he could to try and scare off whatever it was that was watching him. But the noises still persisted, and this seemed to aggravate the creature. Luckily, the animal never came any closer or revealed itself to him, simply pacing around in the darkness and letting out the occasional growl. Just over an hour later, the truck pulled up along the trail and my dad could see to his relief that John was now following the flashlight to where my dad now stood. The arrival of another person must have spooked the harasser, as my dad noticed that he still heard the crunching of leaves and the breaking of branches, but they were now moving quickly away from them. My dad told John what had happened, and the man reasoned that it may have been a bear, and that they probably shouldn't hang around. Together, they wrapped the corpse in a cloth and quickly managed to haul it back to the truck. My dad said that just as they were getting ready to leave, curiosity overcame him, and he decided to walk over to where the sounds had been coming from just moments before. John got out as well, and the two of them scoured the area. Behind a fallen log, they found the half-chewed leg of the dead elk, along with a number of discarded candy and chocolate bar wrappers, along with a small length of rope. Further back into the tree line, they found a pair of latex gloves covered in blood, as well as human shoe prints leading away from them. Near to the shoe prints, they discovered the remnants of a small fire, and even a comic book. This flat out terrified my father. The realization that it had been a person that had mutilated the elk, that had been watching him from the bushes and growling. So much so that he and John had agreed to never mention the encounter to anyone. My dad has told me that not a day goes by that he doesn't think about what he saw that day, and he still struggles to comprehend what the person was doing out there in the wilderness, in the middle of nowhere, how they had managed to kill the elk, and what their intentions were towards my dad. We relocated from the area in 2005 and now reside near Richmond, Virginia. My dad hasn't been back and has said that he will never walk the Appalachian Trail again. I can't blame him, to be honest, because I've never been out there, and thanks to my dad's story, I won't be stepping a foot out there anytime soon. This is a story that I'd like to share because it's something that I can't seem to shake from my mind. My hope is that someone here can offer me some ideas of what happened so that I feel secure in the fact that I'm not losing my mind. I'm a 31-year-old female who happens to live alone. I'd been a bit lonely and depressed of late, so when a girlfriend of mine asked me to go to the opening of a new local bar with her, I jumped at the opportunity. I needed to get out, to be social, and to just enjoy a night. So it's Friday evening, she picks me up at my place, and off we went to this downtown bar that was probably no more than about 10 minutes from my front door. We landed, had a few drinks, and now that we were nice and loose, decided to get up and dance. As we were leaving our table, a group of guys asked if they could take the table over, since the place itself was pretty crowded, and there were no others open. We gladly gave them the table and hit the dance floor. A few songs in, I did the patented pocket pat down, only to realize that I didn't have my phone with me. Thinking that I had left it on the high top we had just left, I went back to the table and was surprised that it was nowhere to be found. The guys who were now stationed there also said that they hadn't seen any phone when they set their drinks down. So that was a bust. The only other place that I had been while inside of the bar was the bathroom. So my friend and I checked there. Still no luck. I asked my friend if I could use her phone to call mine. She of course let me. I input my number and hit the green dial button, hoping with every bit of me that I would hear my ringtone bouncing off the linoleum tiles of the ladies' room. When, after 2 rings, someone answered. I heard the click of the other line, but nothing was said. I, out of habit, said, "Hello?" But all I heard on the other end was a single heavy breath before the call disconnected. I must have phoned myself 50 more times over the next 20 minutes or so, but whoever had my phone never answered again. I eventually gave up the search, and while disappointed that I'd need to drop nearly a whole paycheck on another phone, I decided to cut my losses and head home. My friend dropped me back at my house. I slid my keys into the front door lock, pushed open my door, and headed straight for my room. I was ready to get out of my club clothes, ready to wind down and put this night behind me, when out of the corner of my eye, I see my phone, still plugged into the charger on the nightstand next to my bed. I then remembered that that's indeed where I left it. My friend had texted me that she was outside of my house to pick me up earlier in the night. I had texted her back saying that I was coming out, and I guess that I never slipped my phone into my purse. So that answers where my phone had been all night. But what it didn't answer was who had answered my phone when I first called. I stood there in a stupor for a few moments before my brain came up with all these different explanations. Maybe I had dialed the wrong number. But that couldn't have been. I know my number by heart, and if I had repeatedly called some stranger, they likely would have told me that I had the wrong number. Perhaps the lines were crossed. But then I realized that I don't even know what that means. It's only something that I heard said in old TV shows and movies. And that's when I came to it. Someone had been in my house. This sent a shiver down my spine that felt like 1,000 ice cubes rolling down me. I looked around my room, seeing that nothing was out of place. Nothing was missing. I grabbed the softball bat out of my closet and began to walk around my house, purposefully making my presence known with loud clomps and letting the bat trail behind me. I figured that if someone were still there, I might be able to scare them off by sounding like I meant business. I called out a few times, heard nothing. I went from my room to the kitchen, to the bathroom, to the back hallway. Every step of the way, peeking around corners, making sure things were locked. And that's when I get to the door at the very rear of my house. This particular door has 2 locks, one on the handle and the other above the handle that acts as a bolt. The handle lock can be engaged while the door is open, allowing you to lock the door and close it behind yourself as you walk out. The bolt, though, can only be engaged with a key from the outside. I make it a habit to lock both of these religiously, so when I saw that only the handle lock was in place, it confirmed that someone else had been in my house. It was my phone that they answered. After this realization, I continued my sweep. Nobody was there anymore, but now I'm still left wondering why someone would break in and not take anything. No laptop, no cash, no personal items. Why come in? Why walk around? And for God's sake, why answer the phone?